Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. In this video, we are going to learn about patterns around Java's optional class. Java's optional class was introduced as part of Java 8 to handle null safety. If you like this video and if you find it helpful for you, please like and share and subscribe to my channel. Now let's get into the content. So primarily we are going to look into three main things. So the first one is going to be initialization of optional. The second one would be access, and the last one would be where to use and where to avoid optional. So let's get into the first one, the correct way to initialize the optional class. So there are two ways to initialize the optional using provided factory methods. So one is optional.off, so you can pass the value that you want, and another is optional.off nullable, and here also we can pass some value 1. So the difference between both of these is that optional.off requires you to always pass a non-null value, whereas optional.off nullable does not require you to follow any such constraint. So it's always advisable to use optional.off nullable. Let's see them in practice. Let's run this code and we would see that everything is running fine. So if you see the code executes without any issue, but now let's convert them to null. So if we pass null, and if we pass null over here as well, let me put it first, and if we execute now, we would see that the code is failed, and it fails because of null pointer error at line number 9. So we can see that optional.off nullable does not fail because of null, but optional.off fails because of null. So it's always advisable to initialize the optional using optional.off nullable. Now let's get into the access part of it. How do you access an optional, or what is the correct way to access an optional? Let's first create an optional, or rather hold this optional into a variable. So we can say optional over here. Now if we do simply an optional.get to an optional which holds a null value, this will throw a no such element exception. So it's not advisable to do a get operation on an optional because of the constraint related to null. If it holds null, it can fail. Let's try that in action. So if I do an optional dot get on this, so we can see that our code is going to fail. So it fails and it says that no such element because nothing is present. So then what are the correct ways to access an optional? So correct ways to access an optional are, there are many ways to access an optional in the safer way. So there is optional.orelse. So if you do optional.orelse, you can pass a default, and then there is if you want to perform some action on the optionals value, so you have optional.ifPresent, and you can provide some action over here. If you provide some default action as well in case the optional is not present, so you have another method which is optional.ifPresent or else, where you can provide an action which is to be done when the optional holds a value, and default action which runs when there is nothing present. So we'll try them as well. And if you want to throw an error, some custom business exception when optional is not present, so you can do optional dot or else throw. So or else throw has a default implementation as well, but it's always advisable to use the optional dot or else throw with a custom exception supplier, so that you can throw your own business exception. So let's try that in action as well. So here we can throw a new illegal state exception. So this works, and before this, if present, we will say that optional is present, so it takes a consumer. So I can do a sysout and I can say present, and if present or else also takes a default action. So first let's pass a consumer for present. So we can say it's present, and then we can pass a default action as well, where we can say that it is not present. Now let's run this code, and optional.orelse we can wrap it inside the print statement. So let's now run it, and we can see all of these in action. So we can see an error, which is to be expected because orelse throw in the end throws an illegal state exception, so which we can see over here. But before that, we can see some outputs as well. So we can see NA over here, which comes from the line number 12 where we do optional.orelse. Then line number 13 does not print anything because this optional does not hold any value. And then line number 14, it does print not present because the default action is executed because optional does not hold any value. And after that, we can see that orelse throws an exception. So we have covered the initialization and access part of optional. Now we'll come to last part, which is around how to or rather where to use optional and where to avoid optional. So first we'll cover the part where to use. So the more primary use case of optional is that when you are returning a value from your method and the value could be null, could not be null. So in that case, you should use optional. So we can say when returning a value. Now there is a part of it where you would not want to use optional, which is if you are returning a collection or array of value, because if you are returning a collection or array of value, you would not want to use optional there, because that would make it hard for your client to implement their logic. They will have to implement the optional separately. But in case of list or array, if you simply return an empty list and empty array, they would not have to do any changes into their code to handle it explicitly. So so we can change the use part into a single value. So when you're returning a single value, just use optional, but don't use when you're returning a collection of array or array of values. So when returning a collection or array of values, we should not use optional. There's another part where we would not want to use optional, which is as method parameters. So as a method parameter, you would not want to use optional, rather you can use method overloading. Because if you do method overloading, you can implement two methods, one with the parameter, one without the parameter, and without the parameter could have its own default implementation. So use method overloading instead of an optional method parameter. So that always signifies empathy to your client and the developers who are going to use your APIs. So that's it, folks. In this video, we have learned how to initialize optional, how to access optional, and where not to use optional. If you like this video, like I requested earlier, please like the video and share the video with your friends and subscribe to my channel. Thanks a lot, and see you in the next video.